So a couple things come to mind on this. There's a Linda Reese. I interviewed her a couple of years ago on the podcast, and she wrote a book called The Myth of Fit. And she
Okay.
said so many leaders in that first year fail out. And the immediate thing everyone says, like, oh, they just didn't fit. They just didn't fit what we expect or whatever else. And she said, how many times do we not tell them what we expect, and then they don't fit that, and then we're surprised when they fail because we haven't told them what their target is. And that happens
Yeah.
all the time. I talk so often about people who follow me, who are listening right now, are probably tired of hearing it. But when I was got my first HR job all those years ago, like, hey, we're doing a supervisor training this week. Cool. I'll sit in, listen in. How you train your supervisors? And then for 5 days, it was popping the video cassettes in. Ah, that takes me back. Pop the video cassettes in, and it was, don't do this or bad things happen. Don't do that. Here's your minimum threshold. Here's the legal requirement. And that's the entire week was just those things. And
Yeah.
at the end, I'm like, when are we going to tell them what we expect? When are we going to set a higher
Yeah.
bar than don't do that or bad stuff happens? And so selecting leaders, big deal. I got to interview the head of leadership selection for the Mayo Clinic. Brilliant woman. And she talked a lot about how, like, when we get those people that come in here and they think like, I am hot stuff and I'm going to be great, they're like, we immediately route you somewhere else from the leadership track because you are not going to fit. If you're shining the spotlight on
No.
yourself versus your team, we know you may perform great, but everyone else around you performs worse. And we've seen it in our
Yeah.
data, they said. So they were very careful about that. And so that's my encouragement to anyone. Like, this is not a new problem. You and I probably talked about this before once or twice ourselves, but that's my encouragement on that one. Your point a minute ago about y'all tried this new thing. There's a company that I heard about a couple of years ago that said, we'll do a try before you buy manager option. So if you are
Okay.
out there and you say, I may want to be a manager, I'm not sure. Okay, we'll sign you up for the next cohort for 6 months. You have a small team. You'll do performance reviews. You will help hire new people in for interviews if there are people there. You'll do a couple of those manager things, setting schedules. At the end of that 6 months, you can say, that was kind of cool. How do I get more? Or, gross, I want to go back to my job. And there's no weirdness. There's no backpedaling. Like you were
Yeah.
saying, there's people that are like, this is not for me.
There's no shaming. There's
Yes.
no like, oh, you have a black stain on your,
Your only option is to leave in most companies. If you get promoted to that and you don't like it or it doesn't fit, you have to leave in order to save face. Like, oh, I left for a better
Yeah.
opportunity. You're like, I left and went right back down to that role I was doing before. You promoted me somewhere
Yeah.
else.
Yeah. Well, and it's funny because I have a lot of conversations with people who are trying to navigate their career and figure out what they want to do. And again, I think the legacy idea of what does a successful career look like? Well, it's climbing up the corporate ladder. And so I talk to a lot of folks who are like, oh, someday I want to be a chief this or a VP of that. And I think sometimes the more conversations I have where I share, do you know what that really means though? Do you know what it really means to be responsible for making decisions that impact the lives of a lot of people? And that burden is, you start talking through these things and suddenly people go, I no, maybe actually I don't.
Oh,
And
they think
again,
balloon
not to
animals
try and
for a living.
discourage people from doing it. We need people who are willing to take on that task and willing to serve at that capacity. But I don't think for organizations, you're doing a service, especially when you look at the data you have around engagement, belonging. You're not doing your organization a service where you go, well, anybody who thinks that that's what career success looks like. And sometimes you got to have a hard conversation with somebody who's convinced that is the path for them. And you go, no, you would destroy the lives of the people around you unless there's a dramatic change in your skills or just the way you do it. And you're not a bad person for that. It's just the way you operate, to what you had said before.
I went on this kick about 2 years ago, and I interviewed 3 or 4 people who had just recently retired. OD,
Okay.
HR, learning, like across that spectrum, and said, listen, looking back over your career, what do you think your legacy is? What are you most proud of? And I didn't know what I would expect here. I thought I might hear like, we had this major merger and we saw it through and success, and we implemented this big program or project or became this milestone for millions of dollars revenue. And to a individual, every single one of them, when press said, you know what, we did a lot of great stuff, but the people that I connected with and the relationships I had were the legacy that I left and the thing I'm most proud of. And that is for anyone out there listening in, like, I want to have this impact or I want to pursue this career path. Think about it less in terms of that specific target goal or job title and more about how many people can I influence positively on the way there, regardless of where you end up.
Yeah.
And you're going to look back long term and be thankful and grateful for that path you took.
Well, and the thing about it is there's ecclesiological wisdom in this, in that no matter how big of an initiative you have, no matter how big of a, whatever thing you do in an organization, it's going to disappear. Like nobody's going to care about it at some point. And I think back to some of like the biggest things I did at GE or Abbott, where it was like, wow, it changed the world. You talk to somebody now and they're like, do you remember that thing? And they're like, what was that? Like they have no idea all the time and energy and hours poured into that. And nobody knows a thing about it. But do they remember the impact you had on people? You'll say, well, do you remember this person? Oh yeah, no, I know. And it's like, well, so in terms of the value and the sustainability, and to your point, the legacy you lead, it's about the people. But I think what's interesting is a lot of times this conversation happens for managers. And one of the things that I think AI is pushing to the top is it's not just managers, it's everyone.
Yes.
And it was interesting.